My name is Diana, and my refutation speech is against Andrew A. His claim was that violent video games have zero impact on violent actions from their users. I'd like you guys to take note of that he said zero impact. His secondary claims were that violent video games are not proven as the cause of violent actions. Number 2, violent video games attract more aggressive people. And number 3, violent video games are played by most of society, but violence has dropped since their release. My response to this is that these are all not necessarily true. Most of his works cited would agree with the fact that most of the scientific community believes that violent video games do increase aggressive behavior. Christopher J. Ferguson, one of his sources that he cited, is a researcher for video games and violence. He conducted a recent survey taken from the American Psychologist that states that 80% of researchers working in the area believe that video games increase aggression. Aggression is known to lead to violence, or at least have a strong influence on whether or not violence should be committed. It may not be as easy to prove in adults, but it's easily proven that violent video games do influence children. In Louisiana, an 8-year-old shot his caretaker, whom he had a loving relationship with, after he played GTA. GTA is a well-known, it stands for Grand Theft Auto, and it's a well-known violent video game where you shoot people, you steal things, and you drive like a maniac. He claimed that at first it was an accident, but it was later determined that his caregiver was targeted and shot in the head. And my second claim is that against his violent video games attract more aggressive people. Well, I'd like to point out that his second claim mixes with the third claim that it attracts more aggressive people, and that violent video games are played by most of society. We can't all be aggressive. So psychiatrists state that violent video games make violence seem more acceptable. One example is that the military offers a free state-of-the-art shooting game that they invest $4 million in each year updating it to bribe people into joining the army. Vargas, the writer for the Washington Post, explains that the shooters enjoy playing the bloody shoot-'em-up video game Doom, a game licensed by the U.S. Army to train soldiers to effectively kill. I would also like to quote that he states, "War is no game, of course, but games in a big way have updated war." I'm sure some of you people have heard of drones since Amazon is now using them. And my teacher told me that drones would be used for war now. So basically all a person would have to do is get into a room, get a control that's like an Xbox, and start shooting people, and it would shoot people for real. So violent video games are really changing everything. My third claim is that it's true that violence has dropped since then. According to the Times magazine, between 1994 and 2010, the number of violent crimes among youth offenders fell by more than half to 224 crimes per population of 100,000. At the same time, sales of video games have more doubled than 1996. So basically, it's true that violent video games have reduced violent crimes, but they've done nothing about crimes. Even the speaker admitted that most players would commit a few petty crimes here and there. Overall, my opinion is that it's true that video games may not cause violence, but they do have a very strong influence on it. And violent video games make violence more tolerable. So overall, I think it does have an impact on violence. Thank you.
All right, Diana, you've got a good claim, statement of the claim, and I think there's an interesting focus on that word zero, which is what the advocate used in their proposition. So what all you need to do, if you're going to focus on that, is demonstrate that it's likely to have some impact, and the proposition seems to be problematic. And I thought that you did a pretty good job suggesting, especially on that first point, that there's reason to believe that it has an impact. You had some scientific data that suggests that it has an impact. You have the consensus of researchers who believe that it has some kind of impact. You've got an example of a kid who apparently was stimulated to act on the basis of playing Grand Theft Auto, although to me the relationship here is not very clearly explained. I mean, you kind of explain the kid apparently plays Grand Theft Auto. We know that they shot their caregiver, that they had a good relationship with him, and the caregiver was deliberately targeted, so it wasn't really an accident. But how we know it's related to Grand Theft Auto was not very clear, and that's, like I said, if that argument is true and you can make a stronger link on that, then obviously it's had at least some impact. Zero is not an accurate description. So by their own criteria, the argument would be problematic. On the next point where you're combining, you kind of, I won't say you combine the two, but you do point out how the second and the third arguments almost contradict, because the premise of the third argument seems to suggest that the second argument couldn't be valid. I understood what you were talking about there. The example of people playing the game and learning to act violently and you had the military example that they've got the game there, that's okay. The visualization with the drones is okay, it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure that it necessarily promotes violence or encourages people to act violently. It might make them more effective at being violent, but that's not really where the argument is. So although the argument that you're making here is an interesting one, I'm not sure it's quite as applicable as you think it is. On the next point, I was very confused because you basically are acknowledging that the number of games has gone up, the amount of violence has gone down, and then later on you're making another claim that says, but it did something about violent crime but not crime. And I'm going, what does that mean? I don't understand how this argument is helping you at all. I think that it's really problematic. This is where you would probably want to come in with more of those examples that show that people have either acted out something that they encountered in a game, or were hyped up on some game and then committed a particular crime, or that they learned how to do something because they played those particular games, and then I think you could show a relationship, because as it is, the argument there doesn't make a very effective end point for you. Fortunately, I think the end point for you is the summary that you have. I think you had a very nice summary trying to explain what the point was that you were trying to make in the presentation, and that's a good way to finish off. Thank you.